If someone comes in saying, I'm contracting, I don't need to see the wearable data. I believe you're contracting. But I think there are moments where what a wearable delivers is additive, and additive in a way that actually changes my opinion.
Imagine a world where somebody living in rural Nebraska has an alert on their phone before they even have full symptoms or strong contractions that tells them that labor may be coming and it's time to drive to the hospital that could be hours away. That would be transformative for that person and to the way that we deliver healthcare all over the world. And that's the capability that Chris is creating. So I couldn't think of a more innovative person to talk to. So let's get into it. Dr. Chris Curry is a physician and a scientist, and is a scientist that Oura hired to be a scientist inside of one of the fastest growing technology companies in the world right now. She is one of those doctors who is so masochistic. She got a PhD alongside the rest of her training. She's a complete unicorn because she not only grew up in academic medicine, but she found her way inside of Apple, where she pioneered their technology to help people track their menstrual cycle. And then she brought all of Apple's legendary product ethos into Oura to help advance women's health there. She's imagining the future not only of wearables, but the future of how healthcare delivery is going to work for all of us going forward. I want to start here, actually. So medical training is extremely long, Chris. As you know, having experienced it, you have to do 4 years of college and 4 years of medical school, residency training, all of that. But you decided that you would compound that by also getting a PhD. Explain yourself.
Defend your decisions.
Yeah, defend your decisions.
No, I think for a really long time, my view of self was as a physician scientist. And that continues to be my identity. But the way that that shows up has evolved quite a bit over time. I think when you are doing your MD PhD training, there's a fairly narrow view of what a physician scientist is, and it's like all within the four walls of the hospital. But with the transition to industry, there's no need to stop doing science. In fact, in industry is where I think some of the most compelling science is happening right now. And the way that the PhD component shows up right now is every time there's a new piece of tech, every time there's a new wearable or a new sensor, we get to re-ask all of the foundational questions in our field in obstetrics and gynecology.
Other than masochism, though, just like, why did you do it? Because like the way this works is, I remember you do your first 2 years of medical school.
Yep.
Then you pause medical school, do however many years it takes to do a PhD, and then you come back. So did you decide in college that you were going to do this?
Every question's like, justify yourself. I think part of it is my last chapter in academics was an introduction to public health. So I was at University of Miami and was there at a time when there was local transmission of Zika virus, and got to step from the world of direct one-on-one clinical care into that broader world of public health. And it was the first time, naively, that I realized that as a physician, you don't just have to talk to the patient in front of you. There's actually this voice that's bigger and this voice that's larger. And it has its most classical manifestations as public health. And there's this part of industry which is actually the same, right? As population level health, it is speaking to individuals without knowing who they are necessarily. So having to make sure you're always communicating with a good base of explanation and teaching and understanding. And you get to reach way more people. You think about the reach of a company like Apple or a company like Oura, and you're talking to millions of people with every design decision. And that is public health.
I mean, that makes sense. I mean, who wouldn't want to work for Apple? But like, how did you end up working for Apple? Like, did you just like call them up? Like, what? How did that work?
A friend who I had gone to medical school with, he was already in-house at Apple, a pediatric endocrinologist, and he contacted me one day, sort of articulating their desire to expand their women's health offerings. And probably I was the only OBGYN he knew, though I never asked him that, but was an invitation to support their menstrual cycle tracking as their sort of foundational product in women's health.
And one of the things that I've noticed working in a health tech company is that clinical thinking and product thinking are different, complementary, but different. And Apple is famous for taking things that could be really complicated and beautifully simplifying them. So I'm curious how you went from being a deep clinical thinker to somebody who could think about products inside of a company like Apple.
I think good product design is being a good teacher, particularly when you're talking about data. You're taking a complex idea making it contextually relevant for the person in front of you, and then using your words, written, spoken, to have that person now understand a little bit more about the data. And in this case, when you think about wearables, it's data that's their own body, right? They have every right to understand it deeply. It's a high volume of data, so there's a required layer of translation and teaching. But the goal is not to have to teach every single day. The goal is come, learn. Now you're an independent thinker and learner about your own data. You can come back every day, every morning, and interpret it. And when the data becomes aberrant or kind of off of a person's pattern, cool. Now you have the tools to begin to ask questions about why is it different? Why is it changing?
That totally tracks. I've actually never had anybody explain product thinking that way, but it makes a lot of sense. And it also makes sense knowing you. Wearables have existed for a while, a minute at least. I think Fitbit was introduced to the market in 2009, and Oura has been around for, I think, like a decade now. But it does feel like wearables are uniquely in the zeitgeist right now. I read, for example, that Oura's sales have quadrupled in the last year. So something is happening to make wearables more ubiquitous, more normative. And I'm curious if you see that as a cultural transition or a innovation transition. Is the tech just better, or is it both?
I think it's yes to both. I think part of it is the tech and science. The original trackers were very focused because they had to be, because there wasn't a broad slew of sensors to pick and choose from. And so some of them came to market as like step counters, right? Or activity trackers. And that has value, but there's limited value to a single data type. There's a limited value to a really narrow focus in a wearable. And people recognize that. They're like, cool, I stepped a lot, but does that have any relationship to my health? Does it have any relationship to my sleep? So I think part of it is that the science and tech has evolved so much in the last few years that something that would have been sci-fi. So imagine when we were residents, if someone during, third year of residency would have said, your watch is going to tell you when you've ovulated, we would have rolled our eyes at them so hard.
Totally.
They'd been like, sure, that's cute. That makes no sense. And that is table stakes to be a women's health wearable at this point, right? Like, of course, you can detect ovulation with a watch or with a ring. So I think part of it is the tech, and part of it's cultural. The desire to know oneself, I think, is different. The sense of ownership and autonomy over a person's life and trajectory from a medical position, I think, has changed in the last few years. And the desire to change course and change trajectory based on health, I think it feels different than it did when we were training. It feels different than even 5 years ago.
So you went to Apple to support this effort to make some of these first sort of menstrual tracking capabilities, and then now are at Oura at a moment where wearables are becoming increasingly ubiquitous, leading the women's health effort. What is your mandate exactly? Like, how are you harnessing all this newfound capability and uptake?
I think part of the joy of working at Oura is that we're creating the future in some ways. It is a company that feels bold enough and brave enough and has a stable enough scientific spine to ask and answer really core scientific questions in women's health, and not have to worry about where the market's going, not have to worry about what our competitors are doing, but has enough momentum and motivation and drive to be like, what are the hard questions in women's health? Like, the job is to put together, what are the hardest problems when you and I take care of patients? Patients are also people and members, but like, what are the hardest problems? And how do we set ourselves up to understand what the problems are, define them, describe them, create the data that allows us to even understand them, and then build solutions, right? No company is going to accidentally make a product that physicians like. No company is going to accidentally build a product that both serves a patient and member as equally as it serves a clinician and a health system. How do we, my team, the folks that I get to work with, how do we start every conversation with every member could be a patient, every patient has a provider? How do we build towards all of those use cases, not just a wellness member focus, right?
Now where you're speaking my language, because I want to really spend some time unpacking this vision of yours, because you and I have talked about this a little bit. And maybe just to start with, most of the consumer wearables were built to engage users, not to inform clinical decisions. And by definition, you're working at a consumer health company because that's who buys the product at the end of the day. Maybe let's just start there. How does that land as a premise that many of these tools were built to engage users, but not to inform clinical decisions?
Yeah, I think it's a fair juxtaposition or fair tension. I mean, even in the term, right? Consumer wearables, right? That by definition, that means that the person purchasing the product is making a choice with their money, with their time, with where they want to focus. Whereas in medicine, most people don't choose to be a patient. Most people don't desire to spend their money hoping that they have an illness. And they're like, I really hope that, Dr. Shah, Dr. Curry can be my doctor, right? Most people don't want to be patients. But there's this interesting intersection where what if we said to ourselves, that the data from a wearable, with the person's permission, but the data from the wearable is not supposed to be stuck on the phone. What if in-app data is not the end state? What if consumer data is not the end state? What if we saw health data as existing from wearables in the healthcare system on EHRs, and it's all supposed to be part of one person's health identity? Not EHRs over here. You and I can see it. We can interpret it. It was written for us. Wearable data is over here. It's locked on a phone. You can shake the phone, but the data won't come out in any meaningful way. What if from the beginning by design, it was all supposed to be one ecosystem?
Okay, so there's so much to unpack there, but maybe just to start, it feels like one of the big shifts for me as CMO of Maven in 2026 compared to even 2025 is that we went from a world of relative data scarcity where we had to squeeze stones to get data or wait for claims to be adjudicated or wherever healthcare data lives, to a world of incredible abundance because of wearables and because of other reasons. And we used to blame our lack of clarity about what's happening on absence of data. And now that's not the excuse anymore. And I feel like we have more data now, but we don't necessarily have more clarity. So I'm curious how you think about the signal noise problem, given the fact that, okay, in theory, by the way, I'm wearing my Oura ring right now and my Apple Watch at once. So I'm repping your whole career.
I love it. I love it.
But I mean, there's just so much here.
There's so much.
Yeah. So how do we think about signal versus noise in this new world?
So I still practice, and I'm going to make a mission here. I still get a little bit cringe when a patient in triage takes out their phone to show me something, even though I'm you're probably showing something that I was part of the team building. And I still kind of look away a little bit because unless the information has been curated, it's too much information. You think about something like heart rate. Heart rate's a vital sign. We're supposed to pay attention to it, but we're not trained to think about heart rate as something that we get every 5 seconds, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for an entire month since I saw you last. That's just too much information. And our jobs are not to make our peer physicians hate us. Our jobs are to create the interpretation layer, the contextualization layer, so that when I say heart rate is a vital sign, that comes over with information that immediately helps make it matter. That heart rate was from after an hour-long walk. Okay, I'm going to interpret that way differently than this is your heart rate while you're sleeping.
Yeah.
And some of that feels really banal and really straightforward. But I think the glut of data is forcing us in our research partnerships and our collaborations and our initial design to interpret more. We don't really have the permission to be here's your graph of data. Good luck.
Yeah.
There has to be that interpretive and contextualizing layer. Otherwise, it's the inverse of the complaint. We can't make a decision because we don't have enough data. Now we can't make a decision because we have too much data. So where is that intersection where you have just enough for that moment?
So whose responsibility is that? Is it because someone has to pay the cognitive tax on all the new data that we have, right? So either it's going to be the patient who's going to take some version of what you're telling them, or the battery of lab results that they can access through a portal or whatever and run it through ChatGPT. Or conventionally, it was the doctor's job once to take all that data and synthesize it for the patient. Or is it the platform? Is it your job at Oura?
I think there's a little bit of shared ownership. I'll start with wearables as an example. The person wearing the wearable gets the best data when they participate in the experience to some degree. Let me know you exercised. Give me feedback on your symptoms.
I feel like most people who are wearing them, by the way, have context because it's not like you're not doing it. Just to give you credit, I'm relatively new user and I look at my readiness score and I don't know what's in that. Or even my sleep score, right? You're not giving me the data from the gyroscope or whatever is in this right? You're just telling me how I slept. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
And then most people have context on their own lives. So like, I know if I had an extra beer the night before, that could be a reason or whatever, that my sleep score is lower than I expected it to, or something like that, right? You're, to a certain extent, it feels like you're already walking down that path. And it feels like, not to put words in your mouth, but it feels like you're assuming context, like that the patient or the consumer has like awareness of what's going on in their lives, and they're doing that interpretation for themselves.
I think there's some risk and some reality there. It's possible that someone's paying a ton of attention. So your example, I think, is a great one, right? We find that people's scores the morning after a night out are different than their typical scores. So some of it is that context. Some of it is that people don't have that context. And that goes back to the like design teaching. Maybe they don't have the context or the experience to say, the reason my number today is this is because I did that. And so that is a moment where maybe it's the wearable company's responsibility to ask some probing questions, whether through AI platforms or standardized questions, whatever, to say, that was really different. Why was it different? Here's a list of common reasons it's different, and help people appreciate what's contributing to their day to day. The other thing to say is like, not all change has to be doctor level change. Right? Like not all data deltas need to be ours in the physician's point of view. There's a lot about day-to-day variation. There's just day-to-day variation. I think it's also partially on the wearable company's side to help create those thresholds of concern. Like, what is it fine to just talk with your partner about at the breakfast table and be like, that's really interesting. And where does a change get to a point where it is interesting and that's actually leaning more into pathology than it is into normal everyday. And I think that's partially on the wearable side as well. And on the clinical side, right? I'll tout a little bit about our kind of company to company relationship, but like Oura and Maven have a partnership. And I think that partnership is based on the hypothesis that wearable data is important and on a willingness to interrogate where that value line is. Is it that a clinician at Maven wants all of the Oura data? No. My gosh, like I want your doctors to like us, right? We don't want all of the data going in. But is it that a clinician at Maven who's seeing a patient who's trying to conceive wants to see menstrual cycle variability, the rate of cycles that do have ovulation detected? Like that feels really valuable. That feels like where us having an opinion about the data that we share is actually facilitating care.
Yeah. And to be super clear, like, so both of us are OBGYNs, and in partnership between Maven and Oura, we're taking a capability and even like a consumer behavior that's become pretty routinized, which is like tracking ovulation, something that you helped pioneer on a wearable, but then trying to plug it into a clinical visit, because every once in a while, these wearables pick up on irregularities. And actually, they're pretty good at picking up irregularities, like the routine ones like sleep, but also menstrual irregularities. And this is an area where actually having a more complete historical record than the off-the-cuff. Like yesterday, I went to the dentist and they asked me if like anything was up. And the first thought that came to my head was like nothing new. Because like there's always things that are annoying, but like you have to like reflect to like really think like, okay, I've always had a tooth that's a little more sensitive than the other, like, but like, I don't know, it would be completely different if I had a wearable, is what I'm saying, Chris. I could just tell the dentist, whatever is different.
There's also something interesting in the way you responded, which is like, it's not new.
Right.
There's a difference between like actually normal and healthy and normal for you.
Right.
We talk about this a lot when you think about menstrual cycle patterns. People have menarche. They have their first few menstrual cycles when they're younger. They talk to their mom, they talk to their doctor, and we say, yeah, it's normal that your cycles have a really wide variation in length. And the second half of that sentence is because of your age. But then we don't repeat that learning ever for some people. And so the internalization is, oh, my mom, my doctor, my BFF, they told me that it's okay to have some variation in my menstrual cycle length. And so that's normal for them, but may not be category normal in the medical textbook.
Totally. And it may not become like a burning platform issue until they're trying to get pregnant. Like one of your very specific use cases in your vision is that between Maven and Oura, we can maybe save people time to get pregnant, because in the absence of this data, we tell people to just go try to get pregnant. But maybe we can just see if their trying has been effective historically through their ring. One of the things I'm curious about, though, is I see the case for taking this data and figuring out how to make it relevant to the physician and how they're thinking. What about the other direction of that case where the physician provides a bunch of information and guidance, and in theory, then the person goes forth and they have a wearable on? Do you have any thoughts or specific use cases for how having a wearable on could help now or in the future?
Yeah. And I don't think the following statement is not for every doctor, every pathology, every time, right? There are going to be use cases for all of this. Let's think about PMOS. So formerly
known
PCOS, right?
As PCOS.
Formerly
yes.
known as.
Yeah.
In the textbooks when we were training, there was a line that was like, if people lose at least 10% of their starting weight, their cycles will normalize.
Yeah.
The unstated statement there was ... because they are ovulating more.
Uh-huh.
But there was no way to actually test that because when our textbooks were written, there were no wearables. I'm dating us a little bit. But what would it look like if the wearable was pre-screening for PMOS risk? We see your cycle pattern. We see how frequently you're ovulating. You should do some evaluation. We help you evaluate for signs of high testosterone levels, et cetera. There's this clinical world that gets to use that data and say, oh yeah, that's really concerning. Here are the different behaviors we want me to change. What if instead of just, you should lose a bunch of weight, this is us waving our finger at you, but we want to talk to you about reproductive health. And we want you to focus instead on, is ovulation returning in a larger fraction of cycles? Is that a way to sort of build a feedback loop of your reproductive health is part of your health. Your ovulatory health is part of your health. Can we, physicians, give guidance that then the wearable helps you track or manage? I think there's a there.
No, of course there is. I mean, literally nothing that you're saying seems mind-blowing to me. Because some of this seems very possible today. And then you can imagine easily, right? And just like the patient who knows that they had an extra beer, the clinician also has context. They're not just looking at data in a vacuum. And I think it's not that crazy to me that if a doctor had even a cursory understanding of how the wearable worked or what data was in it, that they would just naturally fold it into their guidance. So my question, Chris, is why aren't they?
Oh my gosh. So we were, the Oura team went to ACOG a few weeks ago. So American College of OBGYNs, as one of our product people said, this is the Super Bowl for OBGYNs. And I was like, this
sure
is the Super Bowl for OBGYNs.
It's a packed house.
It was wild. And we had folks from our whole cross-functional team, partnership, sales, commercial, product, science, research. And part of the mission was to go listen to sessions, to learn what OBGYNs are talking about. There were a number of skeptics in the audience. Often the speakers were verbalizing skepticism of wearables. And so there's this burden on the wearable companies. I feel this as part of my mission to not advocate for the company itself, but advocate for the technology and provide peer-reviewed publications. That's the language we speak. Provide white papers. Those are a little easier to interpret sometimes, but do the job of teaching so that the physicians don't have to go out and do 1 million hours of CME just to catch up with technology, but have a quick place to go to be what does it mean to detect ovulation on a wearable? What is actually happening under the hood? Because I think once you lift that lid and you can take what we learned X number of years ago about temperature and progesterone and ovulation, and you realize all that's been automated. There's a way to correlate our initial beliefs about how the body works with these updated beliefs about how the body works, and then you can trust them a little bit more.
Yeah. My read on ACOG, I was only on the ground for a couple hours and then had to go. But first, let me just say, I'm not surprised that there's some skepticism introducing new technology to a group of doctors like tails all this time. Also, it felt like the constituency of ACOG was reading the room in a way that I hadn't perceived before. The president's panel was on lifestyle medicine. A lot of the sessions on menopause were standing room only. I got a conversation with a community doc about the difference between integrative medicine, functional medicine, and lifestyle medicine. And he broke it down for me because he was that docked in. And it seems like maybe the profession is starting to recognize that they're recognizing what people are demanding and trying to figure out how to lean into it.
There was also something we were remarking about at our booth. So we had a booth, people could come up and talk to scientists or product, whoever they wanted to talk to. But there's a little bit of delta still in, I believe in this technology for me. So physicians would come up saying, I wear a ring, I wear a watch. I love tracking my stuff. But then when you tried to push the conversation in, so what do you do when your patients show up with this information? It's
right.
head tilt. and pause. And you're like, but it's valuable for me. Oh, I need to take it seriously for my patients. They're like, yeah. This is part of the job, is to have people believe in the technology. And often when it's for themselves, they're able to like suspend disbelief. But how do you then take it a layer further?
Right. I mean, but you still practice medicine in the Bay Area. You see patients regularly. When they're wearing an Oura ring, does that change how you approach them?
If my residents ever listen to this, I think they'll get a kick out of it. But like, if my residents go into triage and they're interrogating a patient about palpitations, they're not going to get through their HPI without me being like, what wearable are they wearing? Right? Because it's not that you don't believe the patient, but it's so much easier to triage if you have that secondary information. I think that data does get incorporated, but in the right moment and the right situation, right? If someone comes in saying, I'm contracting, I don't need to see the wearable data. I believe you're contracting. But I think there are moments where what a wearable delivers is additive, and additive in a way that actually changes my opinion. If their continuous heart rate data shows their heart rate at rest at 140 while they're feeling their palpitations, that feels really different than being like, your heart rate was 70 this whole time. My differential has a branch point.
We've talked about some of the like women's health specific use cases, and there's also some broader capabilities that feel like they're imminent. Maybe just break this down. So it can track heart rate pretty well. It can track activity, sleeping, exercise pretty well. It can track temperature pretty well. What am I missing?
Most wearables will have some component of like motion, right? That motion is translated into activity, calories, etc. Most will have some version of PPG, which is translated into what we would consider vital signs, heart rate, respiratory rate, etc. Many will have temperature, which gives a whole bunch of different information. And at this point, like, most of them are really good, really accurate. At Oura, I think one of the really lovely things is like, whenever we're trying to choose a ground truth, the company has gotten really good at being like, what is the doctor going to believe is the ground truth? Right. And you're just like, great, ECG, or, trying to make sure that when we say this metric is reliable, we're saying it's reliable in a way that you understand, dear doctor. But I think that is sort of like the suite of sensors that give all of your vital signs. And then if you add in cycle tracking as the last of those vital signs, like now you have this complete circuit that reflects your nervous system, that reflects biobehavior, that reflects activity. It's actually really strikingly comprehensive at this point.
But like, it's like we're living in a world where wearables are many things.
Yes.
But I'm curious, like, is there anything specific about the ring from a clinical standpoint that makes it different from these other kinds of wearables?
The deeper you are in wearables, and particularly when you give examples, like a bra is a wearable if the bra has sensors in it. Like the term wearables means a whole bunch of different things. The ring or the finger form factor has a couple of benefits. One is literally the shape of it sort of is so much more discreet that people just wear it longer. They wear it at night. They wear it in all of their activities. My science team will give me crap for this, but like when I came to Oura, one of my first questions was around how do we handle data missingness? So much of the behavior of wrist-worn wearables is you take it off at night, you take it off to do this or the other thing, you take it off because the charging duration is often longer. And they sort of looked at me like, who hurt you? Like data missingness is not a primary problem. People keep the ring on 7 days a week. They take it off for 30 minutes to charge here and there, but there aren't big gaps in data. And that data quality is directly related to how people wear it, and how people wear it is related to the form factor. So I think that's part of the advantage. The other is direct access to arterial blood flow. So instead of relying on more diffusive blood flow patterns or more like capillaries on the back of the wrist or on other locations that people might place a wearable, there's arterial flow. And so you can ask different questions because you have a different data set to work with or a different biology to look at.
That makes sense. I'll think about that every time I see the little green light on the inside of my ring.
Yeah, when you're like laying in bed and see it go off at night.
So we have all these capabilities that the ring can do right now. And all of these use cases that you've mentioned, we have all of these emerging capabilities. But maybe at the highest of levels, what is the failure mode in 3 years if we don't get it right? And what is the ideal mode if wearables become more normative, both for consumers, but also for the healthcare system more broadly?
Oh my God, that was like 12 questions in one. I love it.
It was two questions, just to be clear.
Like the failure mode, I think goes back to your comment about we used to complain we didn't have enough data. Now we have too much. I think the failure mode is we don't figure out how to filter. We just get excited by quantity and we don't double down on quality. So I think that has to do with the wearable signals inherently. I think that's also a statement about AI technology. It's like create a problem and then create a thing to fix the problem, right? There wasn't enough data, so we created more data. Then there was too much data for our brain to handle. So we're like, great, throw AI at it. That'll solve the problem. I think the other part of the failure mode is AI is not the solution. It's a tool, but it also is biased by all of the things that make that data hard to interpret in the first place. So I think the failure state is lack of filter.
Yeah.
Lack of a good filter that can like take the abundance of data and turn it into that pithy perfect thing for that pithy perfect moment.
That kind of implies the ideal state then.
Yeah, the ideal state is the inverse, right? It's like, whoa, that's an insane amount of data. But can you tell Neel about what his risk for A, B, and C are in the next year? And can you tell this other person over there when their data matters enough for them to pay attention to? And is the filter good enough to down filter? I think a lot of the concern about wearables is like, do you just make everyone neurotic? Because you tell everyone that something's wrong every morning.
Yeah, right.
And so can we also create the filters in the other direction that are like human variation is normal. We are biology, not engineering.
Yeah.
The variation you are seeing is totally fine and normal. Like that version of a filter is, to me, as important as you probably have atrial fibrillation filter. They serve very different roles, but both filters are super important.
I also maintained my brick and mortar clinical practice when I switched to the digital world. Part of that experience for me was thinking about what I could get done in a 15-minute visit for people and what might be possible if I lived in their pocket and could walk out the door with them. I think what I'm most excited about is some version of that, Chris, where the punctuated 15-minute visit isn't the whole of our healthcare system, that there's some kind of always on point of contact and access, but that it's backed up with something, that we're not just building beautiful, functional front doors, but it's actually getting plugged into the rest of the healthcare system. And that's the vision that I think you brought to Oura and also you brought over to Maven in our partnership. And I'm just so excited to see where it goes.
Thank you, Neel. Thank you for the partnership between Maven and Oura. It's like the thing that excites me most about the job is like the data is not trapped on the phone. We actually get to do something with it. And Maven is brave enough to do those experiments.
We have to free the data from the phone.
Yes, that is the mandate. Free the data from the phone.
That's the mandate. Thanks again, Chris. That was my friend, Dr. Chris Curry. And as we said at the end, the goal is to set the data free, to get it off of the phone and get it into the hands where it can most be used. That is, of course, consumers and patients, but it's doctors also. What Chris highlighted is that in the worst case scenario, what we're going to do with all these wearables is create way more noise. But in the best case scenario, we make this data actually usable and actionable by the people who need it the most. Who wouldn't trust Chris to be in charge of that? I'm so excited about what she's going to help lead, and I'm so excited about our partnership at Maven with her to bring wearables into the healthcare system of the future. Now we're going to get into the required reading part. There was an article in the New York Times this week that my friend Dr. Sejal Hathi wrote. She's someone that I've known since she was a resident. She's a physician, and she currently is at the helm of the Oregon Health Authority, which is basically the Medicaid system for the state of Oregon. And in wrenching terms in this op-ed in the New York Times, she described what it was like for her to give birth and then all of a sudden have the entire healthcare system unplug, which is what it does. I actually think one of the cruelest features of the American healthcare system is that a couple of months after having a baby, when you're at peak sleep deprivation and you're trying to figure out how to keep a baby alive, the rug gets pulled out underneath you. And so what she describes is all she really got was a 15-minute visit 6 weeks later. Meanwhile, she had a complicated third-degree tear during her delivery, and she felt herself completely adrift, as many moms are. There was nobody there to take care of her. Her obstetrician was there for that one postpartum check, but then, was bottlenecked basically in seeing her after that. And her primary care doctor said that postpartum care wasn't really in his or her scope. And so Dr. Hathi Sejal had to figure it out for herself. In the first year of life, the average baby sees a doctor 7 times. And there's no reason, as she points out, that the pediatric visit and the maternal visit couldn't be bundled. And in fact, there would be a lot of benefit to doing that, not just convenience, but the fact that moms could be screened for postpartum depression, for instance. But at the end of the day, keeping parents and babies healthy at the same time is exactly what the research supports, and it's also what families deserve. Dr. Hothy's article in the New York Times is called 9 Months of Medical Attention and Then Almost Nothing. I highly recommend that you check it out. The Preprint with Dr. Neel Shah is produced by Maven Clinic in partnership with Pod People.